So in the second part of the module on consciousness and sleep, we're going to talk about biological rhythms and the functions and the stages of sleep. So biological rhythms can be daily, they can be annual, they can be seasonal. It just depends on the particular rhythm you're talking about. Daily rhythms are often coordinated together so that in fact all of your cells in your body have a daily rhythm where they produce cellular metabolites. Those cellular metabolites are then coordinated together across multiple cells, as we'll talk about in just a second. Some animals use annual rhythms to determine when they need to migrate, or sometimes they may use seasonal rhythms to know when changes in weather might be likely to happen. And in fact, circadian rhythms are defined as any biological cycle that is about a day in length, about 24 hours. They're never actually exactly a day in length. Circa means about, dian means day, so it's a rhythm that's about a day in length. Now, for something to be a circadian rhythm, it has to be repeatable. That means we must see it over multiple days. It has to be internal. So if I remove any external stimulus, if I put you in a cave somewhere alone with no clocks, no TVs, no cell phones, no friends, your rhythm should still run on its own. And third, it should be entrainable. What that means is that external stimuli should be able to alter or regulate your rhythm. So in fact, you have entrainable rhythms. You may notice that you tend to spend nights up until about 2 in the morning. Maybe you're studying, maybe you're working, maybe you're watching TV, maybe you're playing video games. All of those things that you do at night are helping to entrain your rhythms so that then you might sleep until 10 or 11, right? So that maybe the noise of people in your house being up tends to wake you up. Maybe the fear of your alarm going off also entrains you to wake up right before your alarm. All circadian rhythms are trainable by external stimuli, whether it's light or sound or social stimulation, whatever it might be. And in fact, social and light cues can be used to reset that internal clock. So it's not always true that everybody wakes up at the same time of day. In general, there is a lot of consistency about when people wake up, but it shifts a bit, right? So you may tend to wake up at 6 in the morning. Your significant other may tend to wake up at 8 because maybe they stay up later at night or something like that. Maybe they're watching TV. The light from the TV may be actually triggering their internal clock to be reset. So we often find that people who tend to watch TV at night with all the lights turned off, they actually tend to be more sensitive and they're staying up later because the TV is having a greater effect and keeping them up later. How does this happen? Well, as we've been talking about the brain and how important the brain is in setting states of consciousness, there are a couple of structures that are critical. One of them, and you got to say this with me, suprachiasmatic nucleus. Okay, we're going to say it again. Suprachiasmatic nucleus. This is a small area here in the brain, in your pituitary gland. The SCN, or suprachiasmatic nucleus, helps to train your brain to respond to light signals. So when the sun starts to come up in the morning and it shines through your curtains, that may start to wake you up even though you really want to sleep a little bit longer. That's the light signal that's starting to make you wake up. Or let's say you live somewhere where it tends to be lighter later at night. You may actually stay up later because the light is entraining your brain to be awake. That sends a signal back to the back of your brain to the pineal gland. Your pineal gland regulates a chemical called melatonin. You may take melatonin to help you sleep. Melatonin tends to increase as you approach sleep time, and it also tends to increase as light levels go down, so during the winter, for example. So melatonin is one signal that helps animals learn how to migrate. So when winter's coming, they use melatonin to signal that they need to move, okay? So that's all released from the pineal gland, which is towards the back of the brain, and that has a direct connection to your optic nerve and to the SCN, which is very sensitive to light. And in fact, your brain pathways also regulate your sleep-wake cycles by using a network of epinephrine, which is your adrenal hormone. So epinephrine helps to keep you awake at night. It's your fight or flight response. And also serotonin neurons. So you can see here a picture of serotonin neurons that have spread throughout the brain. This network of neurons is what helps to move you from sleepiness or wakefulness. It alters your state of consciousness. In fact, actually, as we'll talk about, some of the drugs of abuse that alter your states of consciousness, like LSD, magic mushrooms, they all work by altering serotonin neurons. So your changing states of consciousness and sleep-wake cycle are strongly tied to changes in neurotransmitters. Now, we know that sleep is very necessary. If you doubt me, go 2 days without sleep one time, if you never have. We like sleep. We enjoy sleep. All vertebrate species that we looked at show evidence of sleep. There are a couple of different hypotheses about why we think this is happening. One is that it's for physical healing, what we call the restoration hypothesis. That wound healing is actually sped up when you're sleeping, and in fact, the amount of growth hormone you release in your body is highest at night. So people in puberty, adolescents in puberty, when they're going through a growth spurt, they tend to sleep more. If you have a teenager at home, you may have noticed, like my son, that he tends to sleep all day long and wants to stay in bed until 9 or 10. That's actually a normal process for adolescents. They're releasing high levels of growth hormone, which is allowing them to grow and meet the demands of that need to grow during puberty. So in fact, a lot of species with higher metabolic rates, similar to what happens in puberty when you have a higher metabolic rate, species with a higher metabolic rate actually tend to sleep more. Cats, weasels, things like that. The second hypothesis about sleep is that it actually helps you to form memories. So one part of it is that it helps you restore your physical body, but it also probably helps you to restore your mental body, if you want to think about it that way, your brain. So we know, in fact, that when you're sleep deprived, it reduces your memory. We actually can stop you from remembering things by just having you stay up all night and cram for a test. Yep, you heard me right. By staying up all night and cramming for a test, you do worse than if you would stop studying at midnight and at least got 4 or 5 hours of sleep. We know your hippocampus is highly active while you're sleeping. You're doing lots of processing of memories. When you wake people up while they're sleeping at random intervals, most of their memories tend to be either totally random things, unrelated, weird sounds or flashes of light, or it's memories of things that have happened in the last 24 hours. And in fact, there are species of rats who they don't ever enter REM sleep or rapid eye movement sleep, as we'll talk about in just a second, and they don't actually form any long-term memories. They don't remember anything more than for what's in front of them for 30 seconds or a minute. Okay, so they're highly forgetful rats. And it seems to be because they're not entering some of those stages of sleep that are necessary for the formation of memories. So 2 functions for sleep. Now, as you get older, what you'll see is that your amount of sleep goes down. You can see here that in the first few days of life, infants are sleeping up to 14 hours a day. We've got this here divided up into 2 stages that I earlier referred to, REM sleep or rapid eye movement sleep and non-REM sleep or non-rapid eye movement sleep. You can see that your amount of NREM is pretty consistent actually. It goes down a little bit once you hit adolescence, but then it kind of stabilizes through most of your adult life. Similarly, the amount of REM sleep you're entering is really high when you're young, when you're forming lots of new brain connections. That makes sense. There's lots of learning that's happening during those first few months and years of life. And then you can see that starts to go down. You can see here right around puberty, we get somewhat of a higher rate of non-REM sleep, which is probably when you're starting to go through some of those physical changes associated with growth and your pubertal growth spurt. But over time, your amount of sleep you're going to need is going to go down, but these are highly variable. Different people need different amounts of sleep. Some individuals report sleeping well on 5 hours of sleep or 6 hours of sleep. Other individuals report needing 9 or 10. That tends to be about the range that we generally see. Sleep deprivation. So there are lots of things that accumulate with sleep deprivation. Let's divide it up into acute deprivation. Acute deprivation, so short-term deprivation of sleep. You go a couple nights without sleep because you're working a lot or you've got a project you're working on. Tends to slightly weaken your immune system. It reduces memory storage, as I was talking about earlier, and it also reduces impulse control, right? People get more frustrated, more angry. They're more likely to honk their horn and engage in road rage accidents because they've really lost some of that impulse control. Almost like, as we were talking about with, as we'll talk about with consciousness, some of the same things you see with hypnosis, actually. Then, with chronic sleep deprivation, what you see are these much more negative effects. Long-term sleep deprivation can be highly damaging for both your physical body as well as your mental health. You see weight gain, an increased risk of type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure or hypertension, and higher risk for heart attacks. And what we see is that in shift workers who are on these unusual shifts where they're working midnight to 8, because they tend to be chronically sleep deprived, So you get home at 8 in the morning, you're going to try to go to sleep, you try to close your curtains, but of course your curtains aren't actually really good at keeping out all the light that's coming in. The neighbors are making noise, the garbage truck comes. People who work nights tend to actually have a really tough time trying to get to sleep. And in fact, on average, they're sleeping maybe only 4 or 5 hours a night. That is damaging for them. Long term, as long as they're on that schedule and not sleeping well, they tend to see some of these negative effects. But that doesn't mean that all shift workers are like this. So in fact, when we protect those individuals, when we give them blackout curtains, we give them an eye mask, we give them earplugs so they can't hear some of the noises coming in, what we see is that those effects tend to reverse. So it's not that they're sleeping at unusual hours, it's that they're not getting enough sleep, which is damaging for them. When you're sleeping, you pass through multiple stages of sleep. So if we look at brain waves, so if we hook you up to an EEG machine, what we'll see is you've got lots of activity here, and then we've got lots of spikes going on. These are called alpha and beta waves. Beta waves are your most alert brain state. So you're in class, you're paying attention, you're engaged, you're listening to this lecture, you're excited. Those are all beta wave activity. Alpha wave activity is when you're kind of relaxed, like you're sitting here listening, we're about 8 minutes into this, you're just, I don't know, it's hot. You don't want to listen that much. You're not sure about this. That sort of relaxed state is alpha wave activity. In stage 1 of sleep, this is a non-REM stage, okay? This is where you see what we call theta wave activity, so you get these spikes. You tend to get some muscle twitches, so you may see if you're sleeping next to someone at night and they've fallen asleep, they may start to twitch. Those are totally normal. And they lose muscle tone. If you're holding onto the remote control, you may drop it out of your hand. This is a pretty light stage of sleep. You may start to process information around you, so you still may be able to hear the TV, so it might seem like you're dreaming about what's on the TV. In fact, you're still basically awake, but you tend to lose sense of time, right? You don't know how much time has passed. In stage 2, you're pretty much unaware of what's going on around you. You tend to get slower breathing, slower cardiac activity. In this stage 2 sleep, what we get are sleep spindles, these rapid sets of firing, and we get what's also called a K complex, a really large spike. We believe that this is your brain starting to coordinate the electrical activity. In alpha wave and beta wave activity, the brain is not coordinated. Everything is doing its own thing. It's all processing what's going on around you. In stage 2 sleep, your brain waves are all starting to fire together. Okay? And we'll talk about why that is in just a second. In stage 3 and 4, what we now call deep sleep, stage 3 and 4 is also called slow wave sleep. What we see are delta waves, these big waves of coordinated brain activity. So your brain is basically testing all the connections you have inside your brain. It's making sure that some of them are getting used. If they're not getting used, it starts to get rid of those neurons. Over your lifetime, you generally are losing neurons. That's not a bad thing. Your brain is just becoming more efficient at how it's using the energy it has. This is the stage when you might see night terrors. So these are not nightmares. Night terrors are when young children usually wake up screaming, highly afraid. There was no dream content associated with it. There's no monsters or anything. They just know that something bad was going to happen. It's almost like a panic attack. Okay? Most children will grow out of these by 10 or 11 years of age. You generally don't remember a lot of what happens during these stages. Again, there's very little dream content. Then you also see evidence of sleepwalking and sleep talking at these stages. Again, there's no dream content here. Basically, your brain is on autopilot. It's just walking or talking, doing the things you would normally do. Then, in the stage 5 sleep, or what we call REM sleep, now what we see is lots of activity. We see some theta waves and even some beta waves. Your brain is no longer firing together, but it seems to be a lot of where your memories are being processed. So when we wake people up during REM sleep, they tend to report having memories of things that have just happened that day. So their brain is basically reprocessing some of those things. And this tends to be when you see dreams and nightmares. Why is it then that some of these dreams and nightmares are these reoccurring ones you've had since childhood? That may just be essentially a brain mistake where your brain continually is activating the same set of neurons. So you're having this reoccurring dream. It's not necessarily your brain still working on it or trying to process this event. It essentially seems to be a random burst of activity. In this stage of sleep, you are completely paralyzed, so you cannot sleepwalk, you cannot sleep talk, but you have high rates of cardiac and respiratory activity. It almost looks like they were awake. If you were watching someone in rapid eye movement sleep, where their eyes are moving back and forth, their breathing would be rapid, Their heart rate would be rapid. It would almost look like they were about to wake up. And in fact, they're not. And in fact, they can't even move. In some cases, for young children, some of these signs will even bleed over into conscious awareness. So you may find that sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night and you're paralyzed for a few moments. That is, you were in REM sleep and your brain hasn't quite released some of those stages of REM sleep. Okay? Or you may find for some individuals they have what we call hypnagogic hallucinations. Hypnagogic hallucinations are basically when you're dreaming while you're still awake. Again, those usually happen just as you're waking up, and usually more in children than in adults. Now, you actually have these cycles of non-REM sleep, right, stages 1 through 4, and REM sleep multiple times during the night. So you start at stage 1, you go down to stage 4, then you come back up stage 3, stage 2, and then usually right into REM sleep. Then you go back down, then you come back up, maybe back down, then you come back up into REM sleep. And you'll do this multiple times, maybe 4 to 5 times each night. So you have 4 to 5 periods of REM sleep. And each cycle is about 90 to 120 minutes long, assuming you're sleeping 8 hours a night. Okay? If you're not getting 8 hours of sleep, what we tend to see, if you're sleep deprived, you're spending more time in REM sleep and less time in non-REM sleep. So for a reason we don't quite understand, your brain prioritizes REM sleep over non-REM sleep, maybe to harness memories as being more important than physical growth or repair of injuries.